Sure, I am not sure that I have a high degree of confidence that that will really happen, or that there's a system in place to make that readily happen.
It's my understanding the fourth alarm is when we're going to be in protracted work periods, like days. So we need a coordinator so that we don't have everybody coming in today, because we may need to allocate some people to come in for the next work period. That's how I've conceptualized the fourth alarm.
So the question was so everybody could understand that the fourth alarm conceptually is for protracted work periods, and that's why we're needing to bring techs in from off duty, and so that needs to be more coordinated, and we need to cycle them in. That's a good point. That's a good way to look at it. The thing that I would say though is, I mean, we can go back to what we've already talked about with rescue. I mean, but now HazMat, let's talk about it, HazMat. I mean, we need so many techs on scene if we're gonna have a large incident. And if we're gonna be making entries and needing entry team, backup team, those kind of things. And just knowing our own department and how many techs we may or may not have on duty in a given day, we might actually, based on what we get from other agencies on their TRs, we may just need more techs, even without a protracted work cycle.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think it's a valid point of what you're saying, but I guess I'm just trying to balance that with the fact that we may actually just need more techs than we're able to bring on scene with a third alarm. Another thing, once you've gathered up that information, you've done your size up, you've got all that going on, and this is kind of dealing with IC1 or IC2. You need to make a report to dispatch and incoming units, establish your command, give a location to the command post, give your size up from the information you've gathered, and then, definitely call for help. Whether, it's the HazMat team upgrade, maybe if you feel like you've had a detonation or an explosion, you might have secondary devices, bomb team, bomb squad, you might need law enforcement. And then state your objectives, right? I mean, we're pretty familiar with this with Blue Card, whether we're offensive, defensive, what our strategy is. Same thing here. Are we just doing life safety, containment? Are we trying to get in there? What are our objectives? And then, of course, scene control. We don't want to add any more victims to the scene, so based on our size up, we're going to come up with our isolation areas as far as what we know of the product and what we've got going on. ERG is going to be from an operations level, first incoming units, going to be probably your best resource for that. If you've got a Wiser app, if you're on the HazMat rigs, we've got peak software. We can do plume disperse or plume projections to kind of see if we have an idea of the product and where it is. We're going to want to deny entry, control traffic, barrier tape cones. We may need PD early to shut down roads, shut down access points. If we're thinking of a large downwind area of exclusion, then again, be thinking in terms of maybe needing to get PD on quicker rather than later. And that's probably going to be another thing where unified command earlier than not, or at least getting some kind of a law enforcement representative at your command post for better communication. Make sure you're establishing a staging point that's a safe area, and then facing out, as always, to try to escape if you need to. And then you need to start thinking about establishing emergency decontamination if you have victims, or if you're sending any rescuers in, you definitely need to have that decon area set up before you do that. And then again, we can maybe go into a little bit more deeper information gathering, right? Try and find out the UN number, product name, classification, what are its primary hazards, any paperwork you can get if it's a shipping process or an on-site facility. Shipping papers, waybills, consists, SDSs. Resources you can try and use for this information is the driver, if it's a mobile unit, or the shipper, consignee, plant specialist, witnesses. Think about all the train traffic we have coming through, right? If you can get I think that's the consist list off the trains. Talk to the conductor or the engineer, or even you can call up BNSF and they'll be able to help you out too. Determine your potential of your incident here. What kind of exposure do you have? What's your weather? Because weather is going to play a big part, especially up here. Do we have rain? Do we have high wind? Do we have snow? I mean, if we've got a liquid substance and then all of a sudden it starts raining, we're just going to be growing that. And maybe it's water reactive, so maybe we're going to really get a light show or something. Make sure that you're sharing your information, especially with what you've gathered with the HazMat group supervisor or the bomb group supervisor, whenever they show up. And again, you got the NIOSH pocket guide, but that may not be very useful for you initially in trying to establish. I mean, realize that the NIOSH pocket guide is going to give you information on the substance and not a lot of necessarily dealing with. And then again, the Wiser and the Peak software that we have. Number 6, we need to consider about emergency or mass decontamination if we have a large group of victims. If we have them that are exposed, then we got to locate our decon area, uphill, upwind. We obviously don't want the decon area being overrun with the product or contaminants. Consider warm water if time allows, so we don't have to add hypothermia to the issues they're having. You want to have your contaminants, as you are moving them to the area, get the people to take off all their clothing, jewelry, everything that's going to hold the contamination onto them, and then you can have them decon. Realize too that oftentimes maybe a dry decon is good enough, depending on what they've been exposed to, what the hazard is. Maybe just getting their clothes off them and getting that substance away from them is good enough. Especially up here, winter, cold, wet, rainy weather. Depending on how many victims we have, sometimes the lesser of two evils is to do that. So have an open mind, but also try not to wait for the hazard. I mean, depending on what you have, right? Don't necessarily wait for the HazMat team to find out all the information and come back with a suggestion. Maybe action needs to be taken, so keep that in mind. If they do need a wash down, it's 5 to 15 minutes. Separate your symptomatic from your non-symptomatic patients, just like in an MCI, have different treatment zones for that. Provide environmental protection as much as possible, whether it's Tyvek suits, which we have a bunch on HazMat 1, or blankets, some way to try and keep them warm, protect them from the environment. Leave contaminated articles at scene. Don't let them take their jacket with them or whatever. It's not worth it. And then as soon as we can, we need to notify the hospital of what they were contaminated with. And that is, realize it's incident command. That's going to be your responsibility to maybe not to do that or determine those things, but just make sure it happens. And then, of course, if we have any large mass exposure events, be thinking of this as an MCI. And if you feel like you have an MCI, realize that the HazMat-related dispatches and resources that you have to handle a HazMat call are for the HazMat call. So if you've got a lot of victims and injured people who need to be dealt with, then you need to be thinking about adding an MCI to this call as well. Again, after saying all that stuff and thought, don't overcomplicate it too. I'm just trying to keep it down to earth. And with especially with decontamination, right? We don't necessarily need to strip everybody down. We don't necessarily need to have a ton of water dumped on them. We don't necessarily need to, take patients who are probably otherwise okay and make them hypothermic and create those kind of issues. Again, do they gross decon? Do they have anything on them? Did they walk through a vapor cloud? And so maybe nothing's really sticking to them, and a ventilation fan just blowing whatever residue might be still on them, or whatever agents off them is good. We have FiberTech wipes now, and I'm not sure, I know South County is going to be more aggressive with that, and a FiberTech wipe is a special type of towel or wipe that is adsorbent and will actually pull chemical contaminants off your skin. So it can be another thing that we can maybe do to treat people who, without having to be real aggressive with water and create environmental issues for them. So there are options out there to consider. Finally, rescue. We're all in the business of saving lives and helping people out. It's life property in the environment, or life environment property, however you want to turn that, but life's always number one. So rescue shall be attempted only if it can be accomplished without endangering personnel and if you have viable victims. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes we have people who are still alive but not viable. And I think we should all have a reference in this job of that to some degree. So that needs to be kind of a consideration of how we don't want to risk a lot to pull someone who is not going to survive out and then endanger our own people. PP will provide pretty adequate protection. I mean, our bunker suits and especially our SCBAs provide a lot of protection, and in most cases can provide adequate protection for most things. If the victim's if you have a victim inside your hot zone, they're deemed to be viable. You've got a buddy system. You can go in and grab them. You've got a standby team in place. Then you can go ahead and make that attempt. Make sure you have an emergency decon set up as part of that. And make sure you're doing whatever air monitoring you can. I mean, we do carry detectors on all our engines, so you can use that. And don't forget to use your heads-up display, your pH papers, right? So your pH paper and your F paper. And to just, make sure we're all on the same page with that. pH paper may or may not be a stop for you if your pH paper activates, but if your fluorine paper activates, that's definitely a stop. Again, if you're going in there and you're getting hits on that person, although they may be talking, is probably not going to be viable. Because every case I've heard of people who have the fluorine exposure, they may be dumping fluorine in their body at the ER, but you just can't counteract it. All right, finally, so about the time that IC2 rolls in, and they have a minute to kind of take command and be able to sit back. We've got this IC checklist, which should be, it's in the county SOD again, and it should be on, is this on the back rig that you know of?
Pretty sure that's one of our sheets on the back.
Yeah, so it should be on all the battalion rigs, and I know for sure it's in the HazMat rigs, so it should be on all the HazMat rigs and all the battalion rigs in the county. And so this again is a resource for the IC to use to make sure they're checking all the important stuff that needs to be done so that no one gets in trouble. And remember too, right, that operations always starts before the technician level stuff. So just if you don't have the HazMat techs on scene yet, the tech team hasn't responded, there's still work that can be done. So again, kind of working down the checklist, and again, if you look at the first 5 or 7 things on the checklist, they're good ideas, but try not to think of it as in I have to do this stuff in this order, and then once I check it off, I'm done with it, I don't have to look at it. You are constantly reevaluating the scene, constantly seeing what's happening, taking that input, and constantly reacting to it, but also we want to be proactive and anticipate some things, hopefully, so that we're ready for those changes when they happen. So, come in as the IC2, you take command, verify the situation, location, actions of the companies on scene, get your needs, your LCANA report from the IC1 that you're taking over, assume your command, locate your command post. Again, remember, I know we talk about in fire, we want to have an area where we can view the scene, but depending on how big this operation is, depending on what you've got going on, you may not be in an area where you can view the scene. It just may not be safe to do so. So again, I think the advent of the drone technology that we have might not be a bad idea to get some drones coming to your location so that you can get a drone overhead and you can actually have a view of the scene from a safe location. So always keep that in consideration. Again, consider your topography, chemical properties. If you have any idea, is it on fire? What's if we have a smoke column, contamination, chemical, cloud, what are our wind directions, where are we located, could the wind shift? Again, there's all sorts of factors to consider. I mean, you're not doing a lot of good as an incident commander if you've got to pack your command post up and leave because you're getting overrun by the chemical. And if you're having to do that multiple times, it's going to really decrease your effectiveness. So try and consider all that. Estimate the potential of the incident. This is that idea I was talking about trying to anticipate what can happen. Think about the worst case scenario. Be thinking of contingencies. If this thing blows up, if this container fails and gets to this other container, and now we have a mixing solution and problems, what are we going to need? What's the release, the amount, where's it headed, what people are involved, what if it gets worse? I mean, if this cloud really develops into something bad, do I need to be thinking about pre-evacuations of areas where I think things can go to? Try and get ahead of it before it becomes a problem and I can't have time for it. And again, weather factors are always the important stuff. Even here on, if we think about a train derailment over here off the sound and it's winter time and we've got storm surge, I mean, we can get some swells, we can get some water up on the tracks. So these are all things you kind of have to be thinking about. And is it over, oh, sorry, go back. I clicked it too soon. Is this thing over our head? I mean, is this beyond our scope? Maybe we need to start getting a civil support team, National Guard on the way. Maybe we need more resources. Okay, so one thing we need to consider, depending on our victims or people who might be in danger, is area of refuge. Can we maybe, is it not safe to completely is it not safe and is it not practical to completely remove them out of the area and far, far, far away? Maybe we need to provide an area of refuge. Maybe if we've got some kind of a chemical that is vaporizing and is floating off, maybe just keeping them in place and protected from that is going to be our best bet rather than pulling them out of the building, trying to evacuate them, having a wind shift, having them overcome by the cloud and creating a bigger problem. So you got to kind of be considering those things and don't be afraid to, I think hopefully at this point, early on, you'll get a tech there or something, trying to talk about that and doing some risk assessment analysis of what the best thing is to do. Oftentimes it's fine to just leave them in the building, or it's the best to just leave them in the building if you can secure the HVAC system so we aren't sucking the chemical into the building, doing things like that. And then if we're on a physical location or a chemical plant, do they have a plan for this? Maybe they have pre-designated areas of safe refuge that you can help coordinate, get people to, or facilitate that, and then that'll be the best thing for everybody. So again, trying to make contact with the plant, get all the information you can is what's going to help you there. Another consideration, evaluate the scene for terrorism, any legal issues, how early do you need to get police involved, let police know what you think, let them do an evaluation of it. So again, is the occupancy a possible target? Have there been threats to the occupancy? Have there been problems in the past? Any recent threat, was there an explosion involved in this? Have there been secondary explosions? Is there anything that maybe a responder thought it might be a trap for responders? All this kind of information can become critical in making some of these decisions. Again, the Wiser app, if you have access to it, can be very helpful for looking at what kind of symptoms people have and trying to make a good guess of what the chemical is based on that. And again, if things are looking like terrorism or very large scale, the civil support team can be very helpful in kind of dealing with those kind of issues and a little bit more specific knowledge and capabilities. But they're not, you can maybe get some representatives there fairly quickly, but you're not going to get the team in anything that we would probably find very helpful.
What is a civil support team? What does that consist of? I've never really heard of that.
That's a really good question. I probably don't have a very specific. So the question was, what's a civil support team? So a civil support team, I mean, if Jeremy was here, I think he's part of the civil support team, so he could probably very well tell you that. Yeah, Van Nuys.
Okay.
But as far as I know, they're focused on like Sebring, which is what, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. So they have the training kind of from those areas, and not just in the battlefield, but also kind of in the municipal environment. Like if a nuke detonates over a city, they have kind of the training and methodology for coming in and supporting that operation to try and help, make things better.
Okay.
So, again, reevaluate the need for evacuation or shelter in place. Again, this is like a constant evaluation that has to be going on, especially considering the evolution of the situation or our situation. What am I thinking of? Hazard. Incident. The evolution of the incident. But got to be considering the population at risk. I mean, are we near an old folks' home? Do we have, mobility impaired people? I mean, again, kind of going in that idea, can we evacuate them? They can't self-evacuate. I mean, do we have the resources to evacuate them? Maybe we need to do protective hose streams. Of course, I don't know how we do that with our solid bores, but that's okay.
No.
To try and move gas clouds, try and protect them from the chemical as much as we can. Time factors. Do we have the time to do an evacuation? Capability to communicate with at-risk population. Remember, SNOCOM can do text alerts. I think we all got an example of that. I was told to evacuate my house because of the fire that was 30 miles away, but it could still be pretty helpful. I think they've got a better way to target that. And, so it could be very helpful, but realize too that to some degree, if that's not really well targeted, right, we might have a lot of people trying to run away from their homes and clogging up roads and again, making that evacuation harder. So lots of things to consider. We want to make sure we've got an ability to monitor and terminate our protective actions. So we've got to keep reassessing if we're telling people to hunker down and take refuge in place and turn down their HVAC systems, and it's really, really cold weather, and there's if we don't get back to them at a certain time so they can turn the heaters back on, maybe again we might be creating more problems if we aren't. And at some point they might, even if it's more important that they wrap up in blankets, they might turn the heater back on if they aren't getting communication from us to let them know that no, it's still an issue. You still need to be worried about it. So that communication with them is going to be an important factor. Again, just another thought, constantly be considering your resources. What do you need? Do you need more? Do we need to try and get outside the county? To pull in more resources from outside there. What do we need? Now, at some point, finally the HazMat team shows up, right? So it is going to be your job as the incident commander to designate the HazMat group supervisor. And you're going to obviously want to make a proper selection and not pick like me. Don't pick me. But grab someone with some experience and some ability to manage their things, right? And someone who understands other people's abilities so they can get a proper science officer, a proper safety officer. They know where to put people. It's going to be your job to establish the incident priorities and what you want them to do. Now, I would anticipate this to be a little bit of a discussion of, hey, this is what I'm hoping you can take care of, and maybe they're going to be like, yeah, sorry, we can't do that. We can't contain this spill. We don't have the ability to patch that leak. So we're not going to be able to do that. Maybe we can try and help with evacuation. We can do monitoring to know what areas need to be evacuated, to know where things are going. So I would anticipate this between the incident commander and the HazMat group supervisor to be a bit of a discussion of what can best be done to help mitigate this hazard and what ability or what capability the HazMat team has to help with the problem. But realize it is the incident commander's job to set up those priorities for the incident. Set up the objectives, right? Another great thing that the incident commander has a responsibility is for notifications, and you're responsible for procuring the Washington EMD mission number. That can be, the last time I checked on this, which was last year, the understanding was that is actually something SNOCOM is supposed to be able to do. If you get on the radio with SNOCOM and they are not able to do it, or at least the person you're talking with is not able to do it, then you can try and contact the DEM, that's the County Department of Emergency Management. For the Everett folks, you should know who the the emergency management duty officer is?
You mean within the city?
Yes, our city, so whether it's Stainer or Rachel, there is a duty officer from emergency management. I'm thinking I've seen that on the calendars before. We've got the administrative officer. So they are on there, and you can contact them, and they are actually able to make all these notifications. They've got the backdoor numbers for the Department of Ecology. As we go through a scenario at the end of this, you will find that they can be a very helpful resource if you happen to realize that. Your notifications again, I mean, if things are on the highway, I mean, the Department of Transportation needs to be notified, the Department of Ecology always needs to be notified, maybe the EPA needs to be notified if you have a massive, air release or release into a navigable waterway, Coast Guard, Public Works, if anything's gonna be affecting their equipment, and, if you've got a problem in a restaurant, maybe the Department of Health needs to know, or a hospital, or something where they have purview, those kind of notifications need to take place. The incident, so the HazMat team and the HazMat group supervisor will assign a HazMat safety officer, but we also need a scene safety officer. So that's going to be the IC's responsibility to establish a scene safety officer. That scene safety officer is going to want to meet with the HazMat safety officer, them to understand kind of what the operation's going on and what things that scene safety officer needs to do. They're going to need to be included in the incident action plan briefing so that they're aware of things. And their main focus is going to be kind of the perimeter. They're not going to be worried about whether or not the techs are safe or all that stuff set up. That's the responsibility of the HazMat safety officer, HazMat group safety officer. But they're more the peripheral, because the HazMat group safety officer can't be running around making sure that people, monitoring the caution tape and stuff are safe. That's going to be the purview of this HazMat scene safety officer. So remember, you as the IC still have to establish that. So hopefully, at this point in the operation, the HazMat group supervisor's been established, the objectives have been discussed, the HazMat group supervisor has gone away, they've talked with the entry guys, they've talked with the science officer, they've come up with their plan of what they're going to do to meet the objectives you've established as the IC. So they will come back to you and there will now be a briefing. This form right here is what should be used for that briefing, and I would like to point out down here, it says approved by incident command. So the IC is actually going to have to sign this plan, that they agree with it and that this is meeting their objectives. So,
Tim,
yeah.
That's kept on HazMat.
These forms are on the HazMat. So this would be something the HazMat group supervisor will pull out and will fill out. There's a backside too, I didn't include it because it doesn't need your signature, but it'll have kind of a layout of the command structure, who the parties are, who's incident command, who's group supervisor, who's all these things, and then maybe a map of what's going on, and again the plan. We are going to try and, we have been told that this valve, shutting this valve off will stop this release, so we are going to send a team in here. They're going to be monitoring for this. It's going to be very specific. And again, as the incident commander, you have to sign off on, this is what I want done.
Who does that paperwork go to?
That paperwork gets, as far as I know, and I could be way off, so if anybody knows, phone a friend, come in on the chat and let me know, but that paperwork all gets filed at the end for the termination, and as part of the termination, incident termination and the incident record.
So, is this part of the record that goes with the billing portion that the HazMat team has to do?
So the question was, is this part of the record that goes with the billing portion? I don't know that it's specific, I don't think it goes specifically with the bill, but it like I say, it becomes a record of the incident.
So it sits on Gagnon's desk. Okay.
Until the lawyers come out and want to sue, and then it's discovered again, and
It's lost.
Okay. We're just working down the IC checklist. So law enforcement considerations. I think at many points before now you've considered law enforcement, but this is again another thought that, hey, as we develop into this incident, have we decided that what we thought was a house fire and someone with some bad home storage chemicals was actually a meth lab? and they're running an illegal operation, and maybe we have police on the perimeter for traffic control, but now we need to involve them because there's going to need to be some evidence collection and possible prosecution, things like that. So again, consider terrorism, all those different possibilities that might cause them to be involved in further. And now we finally work to where, we've stabilized the scene, we've stopped the release, we've stopped the spread of the chemical, we've taken care of the patients, we have done everything that we need to do, and it's time for cleanup. So we want to work towards releasing the scene. Realize as the incident commander that unless you're releasing the scene to a state agency like the Washington State Patrol or the Department of Ecology, you are retaining liability for that scene. For the lawyers out there of you, I don't know if you pass command to, Engine 1 or something, if that then releases that part of the liability to them, I don't know.
The only lawyer I know released the scene to Department of Ecology on the radio and felt very good about it.
Okay. So the lawyers, the only lawyer that Chief Digdon knows said he released it to the Department of Ecology and was very happy with that result, so good for you. So you can release the scene to the owner, but realize with the whole liability factor that you want to make sure there's like a cleanup contractor there. You want to make sure the cleanup contractor has an adequate plan. You want to have some confidence in that because you're retaining some liability of that issue. Then termination procedures, right? We've got all our HazMat report forms. Again, the incident action plan. All the things have to be got together. The HazMat group supervisor has their paperwork they have to fill out. You're going to have to fill out your paperwork. You're going to have to go back and do your report. And then before we can actually disband and go home, we need to have a post-incident debriefing where the HazMat team gets to talk to everybody involved. The science officer should be talking about the chemicals involved, what we found, what we think it is, what kind of effects exposure may look like. So if somebody starts to feel symptomatic the next day, they have some idea of what they should do and should be able to correlate it to this incident. And then all that has to be taken care of before we can actually start sending people home. Then a post-incident analysis, per whatever policy you guys have in your departments. Let's see, and then the final important thing, cost recovery, right? So the cost recovery documentation is, again, I think something that is, depending on your agency, going to be left to the IC, and those are forms that are available that you can fill out. Please don't ask me where they are. I don't exactly know, but if that's needed, we can direct you to it. You have 14 days to submit those forms to South County. South County does all the cost recovery for the